All right. 3, 2, 1. Hey there, guys. What's going on? And welcome back to the Evidence-Based Excellence Podcast with your host and friendly neighborhood far-right thug, Mr. George Cresswell. I hope we're all doing well. Hope we're all having a good day. We're going to be getting back on track with a little bit more sort of fitness-oriented topics today because we've got a little bit of discourse to talk about in the fitness community with regards to a recent study that's just come out that we're going to be going over two perspectives of from people that are vastly more intelligent than myself to speak on, but they have nonetheless been not arguing because it's been a very, very good example of good discourse in the scientific community, as Brad Schoenfeld mentioned about it. So there's a new meta-analysis that came out with regarding protein intakes when we are cutting, and there's been a little bit of disagreement and critique over it. We're going to be going over two social media posts that are going to explain a little bit more about the study today, and I'm hoping nothing screws up. We've got a little bit of a different layout for today's episode. But obviously, I wanted to get back on the, health and fitness topics for a while. I know the recent episodes of the podcast have been dominated by the political landscape, particularly in the UK and really around the world. And I was having a conversation with one of my good friends the other day, and he was saying, come on, you need to get back. You need to start doing more nutrition topics and training topics and stuff like that. Because I've been talking a lot about the political landscape and the overall state of the UK in, I don't know, it's got to be the last at least 5 or 6 episodes, I would imagine. But that's because I think it's very, very important for people to talk about. I've said that time and time again, that, people are far too laissez-faire when it comes to these things. And for example, there'd be many people listening to this, or some people listening to this that wouldn't even know about the recent assassination that took place in Sweden. Obviously, if you've been on X in any real capacity in the last couple of days, you would have been familiar with a figure in Sweden known as Salwan Momika. I'm going to read you his X bio at the moment so you can sort of understand a little bit about this man and why we're bringing him up. It's only going to be a short part of this introductory section to this episode, guys. It's not going to take very long, but he was recently assassinated. And the assassins, from what we can gather, I don't believe there's been any specific comment from the Swedish government at the moment, but they'll do everything they can to try and cover up the nature of what happened if this was the case, because he was killed for burning a Quran publicly. That's what he was killed for. And from his bio, he's a thinker, critic, and burner of the Quran in Sweden. You may ask, why is he doing this? Why is he burning this Quran? Isn't that the Muslim or the Islam book of faith? Isn't that not a good thing to do? Well, people have different stances on whether you should or shouldn't burn holy books and these kind of things, but he chose to. And you can argue that it's very much so an expression of free speech. People who are in favor of free speech, Christians in favor of free speech, for example, be like, you burn a Bible if you want. That's free speech. It's your free speech. You can burn the Talmud, you can burn the Torah, burn whatever other holy books there are. But what happens is when you burn this one is you tend to suffer very drastic consequences. Problem is that the government are in league with the people that want to persecute people in this way, because they refused to protect Salwan. In fact, they were trying to extradite him to Iraq, where he's originally from. So he's originally from the area of Syria, which I believe is modern-day Iraq. And He's Aramaic in his mother tongue. Sorry, his mother tongue is Aramaic. He's not Aramaic. He's Assyrian. And that's obviously different from Syrian, by the way. And he's not an ex-Muslim, so he's not an or rather a Muslim apostate, where the punishment for apostasy in an Islamic state is death. He was born into a Catholic Christian family, and he fled that region due to Islamic persecution, which is not a unique tale, really. It's not a unique story with regards to the persecution that religious minorities, such as Christians, such as Jews, such as Yazidis, such as any which is any Arab that is non-Muslim, I believe is the definition of Yazidi. The persecution of religious minorities or ethnic minorities in Islamic-dominated communities is not unheard of. In fact, it's very, very common, as much as people don't want to talk about it or refuse to talk about it. But he went to Sweden. I believe he initially went to Norway, and then they refused to grant him asylum, even though he was fleeing political persecution. He was fleeing political persecution. His family, as well, were victims a lot of this political persecution, those who I believe remained in the region that he fled from. But then he eventually obviously met his end in Sweden, where he was also trying to be granted asylum, and they also refused. And they were actually in the middle of prosecuting him for trying to, as a result of that prosecution, get him extradited to Iran. Not Iran, Iraq. Sorry. They were trying to extradite him to Iraq. If you go to at Salwan_Momika1, so that's SALWAN_MOMIKA1 on Twitter, or on X rather, you'll find the details of what happened. And he was actually trying to seek refuge in America before, sadly, his life was cut short. The thing is that all the government officials in Sweden basically come out in favor of the terrorists, basically come out in favor of the murderers, by saying this was a racially aggravated incident, despite the fact that race has nothing to do with it, because Islam is not a race, it's a political ideology, and have basically, sent the message that if you do this, we're going to side with the people that want to kill you. And other people who are in the community who've also expressed similar disdains of Islam. Rizwan, I believe his name is. Is it Rizwan? Rizwan or Ridwan? I'm sorry, I'll find it now. He goes by the apostate prophet on. Oh damn it! I can't find him. He goes by apostate prophet. I can't find him. But I can't remember. Ridvan. Sorry, Ridvan. 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 He's been vocal about his opposition to Islam, and he's actually an apostate, I believe, from Islam. Hence his name. But I kind of lost my train of thought a little bit with that now. But people have threatened to kill him as well. People from this community have threatened to kill him. And it just highlights the fundamental difference between the two societies, namely ours, or what our society was, namely a strong Christian society at one point in time, not anymore, but a strong Christian society at one point in time. And it's gotten only worse since the liberal agendas have worked its way into society, in my opinion. But we have serious problems when the government that would be charged with, we've always been told we've got to open our borders to these people, these asylum seekers who are undergoing persecution. But then when it's people who are being persecuted by who our government are trying to say are asylum seekers, and the persecuted themselves are trying to seek asylum, because that's a little bit more politically difficult, and they know what certain people of this community will do. In fact, they know what this community will do as a whole, really, because although not all of them maybe will take up arms and go with guns to go and kill, a lot of them will either cover up or tacitly endorse these kinds of crimes, as we've seen with the rape of Britain, where it's a community and cultural issue. Not just a race issue. It's a community and cultural issue, because there's many times where people in this community could have gone to the police and said what was going on, and they chose not to. They have more loyalty to their own communities than they do to the people of the nation as a whole. And that's how you end up with, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of young, predominantly British girls being raped by gangs systematically of predominantly Pakistani Muslims. Not to mention the police and the government and everyone's in on it also to try and cover it up and tacitly endorsing it. But as I said, the Swedish government were trying to extradite him to Iraq, where God knows what his punishment would have been. But they didn't get the chance because 5 assassins broke into his apartment and murdered him while he was on a TikTok stream. So, very courageous, very, very courageous man. But if you wonder why I talk about the dangers of the political landscape in the UK so much, this is why. Your daughter, your sister, your young nieces and cousins, for example, like me, could be some of the victims of the next wave. It's still ongoing. It's still ongoing. The rape of Britain is still ongoing. It's still being covered up. The next victims could be somebody close to you. Could be your kids. Could be your sister's kids. You know? Could be your grandkids. The next person to be killed for exercising their right to free speech or imprisoned politically for exercising their right to free speech could be you. If you decide, you know what, this is actually not okay and I want to say something about it. If you're not a coward. But, you know, that's where we are. That's why it's so important to talk about these things and so important for people to take note. We are very far down the road to serfdom. And we are very far down the road to dimitude. And you ought to take that seriously. So that's why a lot of the episodes recently have been dominated by politics, you know, as much as I don't like to talk about politics that much, because it actually has an effect on me also, going through the videos that we've gone through, talking about some of the things that we've talked about, seeing the state of how the country has been destroyed. It does actually have an effect. It has a massive effect on me. Especially when I'm talking about it and relaying it to you guys. You know, it's not easy. It's not nice things to talk about. But yet so many people just would rather bury their heads in the sand. So that's where we are. Anyway, that's why we talk about it so much. Because I don't know about you. I don't want to live as a serf. If you're not sure what a serf is, go Google it. Go Google serf and serfdom. SERFDOM. But we are going to be getting back into a little bit more of the science-based topics, especially with a couple of the projects I've got coming up. Stay tuned for that. Got a very big project coming up, which I'm excited to reveal in the very near future. But we're going to be going into today. Allow me first to introduce to you one of the new layouts which I've been experimenting with. Yes, it is a Stream Deck, but I'm going to take you now. I don't believe my transition actually worked. Into the classroom. So welcome to the classroom, guys. So yeah, this is how we're going to be showcasing today's episode. So this is from Instagram, and as you can see here, it's from Menno Henselman, or Menno Henselmans, however you say the name. But it says here, new meta-analysis recommends up to 3.2 grams per kilogram or 1.5 grams per pound of protein for cutting lifters. And it says here in brackets, and using fat-free mass was no more accurate than body weight. So this is in reference, pardon me, to the study which you see referenced down below. I'm going to now cut out of OBS so that I can click through some of the slides in this this Instagram post. Hopefully nothing goes wrong in the meantime. But it says here, effective dietary protein on fat-free mass in energy-restricted, resistance-strained individuals, an updated systematic review with meta-regression by Martin C. Ruffalo, Eric Trexler, and Eric Helms. You will know that Eric Trexler and Eric Helms are very much so heavyweights in the nutrition and health performance coaching spaces. And this is, I'll read you this little bit of information from Menno first, and then we'll go through the slides as we go. So, a new meta-analysis of 29 published studies. I'm just going to quickly check in OBS, make sure everything's still working. Found a positive association between protein intake of fat-free mass changes in non-obese resistance trainees in an energy deficit. There was a linear positive relation in the study protein intake range of 0.2 to 3.2 grams per kilogram per day. So researchers concluded the most serious lifters like bodybuilders should consume the top end of that range, 50% higher than even the 1 gram per pound rule for bro wisdom. Okay, so this is what we have here. So there was a recent meta-analysis of 29 studies that came out. From what I've read briefly of the study, I have not read the whole thing. I've read parts of the results and the conclusions and stuff. But there was actually 31 studies which met the inclusion criteria, but they couldn't get the data for 2 of them from the authors of the study. So it's 29 included in all. I think it was about 600 or so, 700 or so participants in all. And they did indeed find this positive linear correlation or relation to protein intake and favorable outcomes with regards to fat-free mass. So a linear correlation is where, let me just quickly look back here. So a linear correlation, I'm going to just quickly zoom right back, is where you have this kind of relationship. I'm not sure how it's going to appear on the webcam here, because I often, when I'm seeing the mirrored image, I often get my rights and my lefts confused. But basically, you have a linear positive correlation if it's going up and to the left, up and to the right on the graph, sorry. Linear negative if it's coming down and to the right, those kinds of things. So if it's a straight line, it's not a curvy linear relationship or anything like that. It's a straight line going up in that way. And it basically tells you that both of the variables are going up by this factor at the same time. So oftentimes, you have, you can plot weight loss trends this way. You know what I mean? You can plot different diets on body weight and time, for example, and see the trend in how people lose weight on those diets over time. You can plot, as they did here, change in fat-free mass or favorable change in fat-free mass associated with protein intake expressed in grams per kilogram per day. And they found this linear relationship. So more favorable, the favorable increases or the favorable responses in fat-free mass directly related to the increases in protein intake up to this 3.2 grams per kilogram region. So that's what this linear relationship was observing. So we'll skip it on to the next one now. So I believe you include the graph. So here you go. So this is what the graph looked like. So you have standardized mean change, and then you have dietary protein intake. So you're seeing this linear relationship going up this way, okay? The researchers are some of the best in the field, but their protein recommendation does not follow from the data. So Menno, the reason why this sparked a little bit of discourse, is actually quite heavily critiquing this data. So you have here, protein intakes above 0.8 grams per kilogram are beneficial for lifters. I believe this is the range for simply just maintaining nitrogen balance in sedentary individuals. Or at least there's been no updated range from this for sedentary individuals in terms of just the regular protein intake that they are recommended. But the researchers did not perform a breakpoint analysis to determine at which point the benefits stop. And that's what they did in the previous study. So I'll skip forward now. So this is a study by, I believe Menno was one of the authors. You can see him here, but Brad Schoenfeld was on this. So the Brad Schoenfeld is one of the premier researchers in this field. Eric Helms was also, Stuart Phillips, another big name, James Krieger, loads of Alan Aragon, one of the biggest names in the field. So this research that was done in 2017, or was it 2016? 2018, sorry, it was published. Very, very big, point of evidence for this break point whereby you see this plateau. So they concluded that break point really was 1.6 grams per kilograms per day, and it could also be up to 2 grams per kilograms per day. So that's where he says here. So, of course, protein intakes above 0.8 grams per kilograms are beneficial for lifters. The research did not perform a breakpoint analysis. Now, later on, we're going to go through this post first, but later on, I've also got the response from the author's post to go through where they were responding to these critiques. I wanted to show you that because it's a great example of, within the field, how discourse is meant to be held. A good example of positive discourse where everybody benefits from, okay? Whereas if you just have an argument and, it's not productive in any way, it's not conducive to learning, it's not conducive to anybody's development, this one absolutely is. So we'll go through Menno's critiques and then we'll go through the response post. So he says here, imagine, and he's using the picture of John Lennon here, because Imagine is a song by John Lennon, quite a controversial one. There had been another study with a protein intake of 4 grams per kilogram. One study would not meaningfully alter the regression slope, meaning it would not ultimately that much alter the overall trends in the data. So based on the author's logic, they would now recommend 4 grams per kilogram or 5 grams per kilogram if there was a study with such intakes and RIP participants, because that's a very, very heavy protein intake. I'll give you an example. So if we have a 100 kilogram male and we do 5 grams per kilogram, obviously that's 500 grams of protein a day. 400, 500 grams of protein a day. So that's a lot. That's a lot. Obviously, basing it off fat-free mass might be a little bit different. But so yeah, if you were to continue this line up past this 3.2, obviously we would assume that if this was just to continue based on what the authors are asserting, then surely just more protein is better. It's a good observation. It's a good observation. And instead of a breakpoint, they tested the linear relation versus the cubic and quadratic ones. This is addressed in more detail in the response post, by the way. It's quite getting into complex statistics now. Menno is asserting that neither of these make any sense, so the linear relation came out best. A logarithmic or other asymptotic relation to model diminishing returns would have made more sense. Okay, so he's critiquing the method of plotting, the method of relation that was being used. He's arguing that cubic or quadratic ones would have been more appropriate. Even if we take the results, and the authors do say this, the effect size of going up in this way is very, very small. So there was a very, very overall a small size effect difference. And apparently, what he's asserting here is that the assertion that basing protein intake on fat-free mass was no more effective than basing it on body weight. And he's actually going into the results here, and he's saying I believe the R2, I believe he's referring to the coefficient of differentiation. I believe R2 is. R is typically Spearman's coefficient. I get them confused in my head sometimes. It's either Spearman's rank correlation. That's it. Sorry. Spearman's rank correlation is often R. And then I believe it's the coefficient. It's either the coefficient of deviation or the coefficient of differentiation. I get the terms mixed up in my head. And the standard error data fits were virtually identical, actually in contrast to the author's conclusion. So it's arguing that there's a lot of methodological problems in this and that the results don't actually say what they claim to. So this is a good critique, though, is that since most people can't accurately estimate their body fat percentage, most of them do not estimate it very accurately. Obviously, if you have tools like in-body and bioelectrical impedance, and you know how to use them correctly, and you do use them correctly, and you make sure that you do it under the same conditions every time, you can get a good estimate. But ultimately, it's still just an estimate. And obviously, people trying to do it with skinfold calibers and stuff like that, it is amazingly, I'm trying to think of the word. That you need to have a good practitioner to do it accurately, is what I'm trying to convey. People often use the skinfold method and they do it completely wrong. Either they don't pinch off enough, or they pinch off too little, try to skew the results to make them seem a little bit more favorable. So it's a good method if you have somebody that's going to do it properly and knows how to do it properly. And then here, the effect of protein intake on fat-free mass interestingly decreased at higher energy deficits, both in the fat-free mass and in the body weight models. This contrasts with the idea that we need more protein in greater deficits. So that's Menno's critique of this study, and a lot of points there which the authors of the study would indeed need to address. So as you can see here in the comments, this is one of the authors here. This is Mr. Rafalo. He says, "Hey Menno, thanks for sharing our research. In the future, we are open to questions for clarification and insight about aspects of our work and course. Always welcome feedback. There are a few points I'd like to raise based on your interpretation, so I'll be making a post soon." Now, I'm going to be going over the post that was posted by Eric Helms. He says here, "Public dialogue should make everyone better off, so I look forward to reading it." And that's a good point. Public dialogue does make everybody better off. That's why you shouldn't stifle free speech, Mr. European governments and Mr. Keir Starmer. And Eric Helms also responded to this, and he said, "Just wanted to echo Martin here. Thanks again for sharing. And yeah, I think based on how you understood and or interpreted the review, I think we could have done a better job communicating aspects of the data. So we'll definitely do our best to clarify in a forthcoming social media post. Maybe, up to you, this is your post, no pressure. You could pin this comment by Martin so people will know we'll be doing that to clear up any confusion, as that will be helpful to those following along." And he said, "Done, post pin." So although he's critiquing the research, obviously Menno is open to hearing it. He wants to hear the response to that, and he's making sure people know where to go and find the response. He done that by pinning the comment to the top. So always good to see that. Obviously, some people, they're not open to this kind of interpretation, or they're not open to this kind of discourse, this kind of conversation. It's always good to see that. I'm just going to make sure we're all still lined up before I transition over to the response post. So this is from, we're all good. So this is from the response to that post which we just read. So protein intake in a deficit, our response to Menno's critiques. So this is from the three authors, which you can see here. It says here, just read this top comment or this post caption. "If you saw Menno Henselman's critiques of our study on protein intake, please check out our responses here. Sorry for all the text. It is a very text-heavy post. But we hope this improves research interpretation. Check out Menno's post for all his critiques." And this is where Brad Schoenfeld was saying. Brad Schoenfeld was obviously one of the researchers in the post that Menno, one of the studies that Menno brought up, substantiating his point. And even he's in here in the comments saying, "A great example of how true scientific discourse should be conducted to further understanding on a topic." Boom. So I hope that didn't just send my webcam out of focus. Nope, it didn't. Good. So let's go through this. So we'll just go through these one by one. Menno, there was a linear positive correlation in the studied protein intake of 0.8 to 3.2 grams per kilogram per day. So the research concluded that most serious lifters like bodybuilders should consume the top end of that range, 50% higher than even the 1 gram per pound rule of bro wisdom. Now, you'll obviously know that that's a quote. Pardon me, that's a quote from Menno's post. It says here, our response. And it's good because they substantiate it with quotes from the article or references to the results section and all those kinds of things. It's important to distinguish between our findings and our recommendations. Always a good thing to do. Obviously, there's a good bit of fleshing out that the authors could do in the discussion section, for example, whereby the results may show like the statistics, but then there'll be a little bit more room for interpretation in the discussion section, which is where this distinction comes in place between what the people were construing them to be told, what they were saying as conclusive, when in regards to it, it was actually more exploratory that they meant for it to be. So the linear relationship between protein intake and favorable fat-free mass changes up to 3.2 grams per kilogram of body mass were identified, as well as 4.2 grams per kilogram of fat-free mass across the available studies. However, the recommendations were exploratory, as it was more nuanced and cannot be distilled into a single sentence. So they stated this in the article. And this article is free to go and read, by the way. It's open access on ResearchGate and all the other places, so you can go and read this entire study. I'm going to read it when I get the time. While these conclusions are based on stronger evidence than prior recommendations, the heterogeneity, so the variance between studies, included in our meta-regression renders the findings exploratory rather than confirmatory. Practitioners and researchers should thus interpret the results with caution and treat findings as hypotheses that may be carefully tested in practice and or future experimental investigations. So, authors clearly showing that they did not mean for this to be conclusive in any way. This is just something that we've identified that's interesting so that we can explore in the future with future research projects. Always good to do. If you manage to identify that as in the course of a research study, that's a win. If you generate more research questions as a result of the study, that's a win. Menno. Of course, protein intakes above 0.8 grams per kilogram are beneficial for lifters, but the researchers did not perform a breakpoint analysis to determine at which point the benefits stop. In our study, the breakpoint was 1.6 grams per kilogram, though a recent analysis by Greg Knuckles concluded it may be 2 grams per kilogram. So this is where Menno might have been, highlighting the potential that the authors were trying to embellish their results in some way. Well, they're actually going to throw that back on the previous study that Menno mentioned a little bit with something that he didn't mention, whether he simply forgot to or whether it was just he ran out of characters or whatever. The breakpoint analysis in the Morton et al. Study, so that's the study that Menno mentioned where he highlighted that graph, which goes up in a linear fashion and then cuts off. I don't know if I'm doing that in front of the camera, comes up like this and cuts off, was not statistically significant. So that relationship, that breakpoint, was not statistically significant. In fact, I'm going to go back and I'm going to find it. So it's this one here. Let's make sure it's still there. So this breakpoint was not statistically significant. Obviously, Menno didn't mention that. If we were to apply strict statistical standards based on null hypothesis significance testing, the identified breakpoint would not be considered valid. Okay, so if it didn't reach statistical significance, it does not reach the threshold by which you can disprove the null hypothesis or reject the null hypothesis. As such, the overall assertion would not be accepted. Given this, Morton et al. Should also have relied on a linear model. Similarly, our data, including most non-linear patterns, do not indicate the presence of a breakpoint. It is also worth noting that Morton et al. Is now outdated, and the most recent meta-analysis by Nunes et al. In 2022 on protein intake and fat-free mass and energy maintenance or surplus reports a significant continuous positive relationship. So they're saying there's more evidence to put forth, or rather to... it might just be a case of Menno wasn't aware of this study. Sometimes things do sometimes slip through. But the study he's referencing is outdated because it was done at a previous time before this study, and this study is now stronger, which comes and sort of refutes the idea of this study that there is, in fact, a breakpoint. So, again, it's not clear, not conclusive by any means, but it is showing that there's potentially more evidence to support what Ruffalo and Helms and Trexler were asserting rather than what Menno was asserting. Number 3. Menno. Instead of a breakpoint, the authors tested the linear relation versus cubic and quadratic ones. Neither of those make sense, so the linear relation came out best. Let me just have a quick drink a minute. So, the response. While multiple nonlinear approaches exist, we selected models that we believed were sufficient to capture potential diminishing returns. If a nonlinear model had better represented the relationship indicating diminishing returns or a plateau, it would have resulted in a superior model fit, but that was not the case. Visual inspection of the meta-regression also does not suggest a breakpoint. So it seems that if you're expecting to find a breakpoint or some of these kinds of things, that the cubic and quadratic ones would work better, but because there was no obvious breakpoint from visual inspection of the data, and if there was, in fact, an indication of diminishing returns and plateau, which would have meant that a nonlinear model would have represented the data better, then they would have used it. But that model did not actually result in a good fit for the data that was there, so that's why they used the linear model. So this is a good example of where they used the model which best fits what the data shows, not twisting the data to fit the model. Okay? So that's a very, very important distinction there. And it's a quote from Lane Norton. I can't remember who he's quoting in this instance, but it's a great quote where he says, if you torture the data enough, you'll make it show what you want to show. So that's where these researchers, or at least what they're putting across, is that they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to make the data arbitrarily fit a model which might not actually fit the data best. They had the data set, the data showed what it showed, and they chose the model which best fit to show what the data was showing. So very, very high level conversations going on here, very, very high level points being raised. As you know, that these scientists are likely acting with good integrity. Okay, and that's obviously a massive point of contention in the political space at the moment, where political representatives of science have not acted with good integrity, and as a result have needed preemptive pardons. But anyway, let's not go down that rabbit hole in today's episode, but it's a good indication here that these scientists, Trexler, Rafalo, and Helms, are actually approaching this the way that they should, approaching this with integrity. Menno. Imagine there had been another study with a protein intake of 4 grams per kilogram. One study would not meaningfully change the regression slope, so based on the author's logic, they would now recommend 4 grams per kilogram or 5 grams per kilogram if there was a study with such intakes. RIP participants. The response for number 3. Oh, is this actually number 3? Nope, response for number 4. They got the numbers wrong. It seems that there is an assumption that our model breaks down at high protein intakes and that we are naively extrapolating to the highest observed intake, 3.2 grams per kilogram of body mass. However, the study with the highest recorded protein intake aligns closely with the regression line, demonstrating that the model remains robust even at higher intakes. A single additional high protein study would not impact the findings, as we actively accounted for potential outliers in our analysis. Caution is warranted in this line of reasoning, as dismissing current findings based on the mere possibility of future evidence could be used to discredit any meta-regression rather than engaging with the actual evidence at hand. That's a good point. That's a good point. So you can dismiss the current findings based on the mere possibility of future evidence, but you don't know what the evidence is going to show in the future. So it's not a good point to dismiss what we have at hand due to the potential of what could come later, because the potential of what could come later, although we can make educated guesses, is ultimately uncertain. Menno. Even if we take the results at face value, the effect size of going from a paltry 0.8 grams per kilogram protein all the way up to a protein powder for breakfast, lunch, and dinner 3.2 grams per kilogram was small. We acknowledged in our paper that the effect size was small and aimed to quantify it. This is precisely why we provided nuanced, exploratory recommendations that emphasize individualization. For some individuals, consuming a protein intake between 1.9 grams per kilogram per body mass and 3.2 grams per kilogram of body mass may not be justified given the relatively small favorable effect change in fat-free mass. And they stated this in the article, quote, increasing protein intake from the lowest 0.8 grams per kilogram of body mass per day and 0.9 grams per kilograms of fat-free mass per day to the highest 3.2 grams per kilogram of body mass per day or 4.2 grams per kilogram of fat-free mass per day, analyzed intakes resulted in only a small effect size difference. So if they're basing these off the effect size recommendations of Jacob Cohen, for example, we would expect this therefore to be likely around 0.2 in terms of an effect size. Jacob Cohen's values for effect sizes, which he outlined in his book, which I believe was published in 1988. In this instance, he gave the effect size of 0.2 to show a small difference, up to 0.5 to show a moderate difference, and then up to 0.8 to show a high difference. Okay, and anything higher than 0.8 is a large effect size. So we would assume this is either like 0.3 or 0.2. 0.1 and less tends to be just trivial. Either there's no significant difference, or there is a significant difference, but it's so small that you wouldn't really notice anything. It's like if you imagine like a small effect size. If somebody goes to the gym, they train for a little bit, and you've seen that they've improved their body composition a little bit. You're like, you can see it a little bit. It's like, yeah, you like improve like a minuscule amount. That would be like a small effect size. If somebody has a moderate effect size, it's like you haven't seen them for like six months or a year, and they've been going to the gym like religiously, like twice a day, 6 days a week, chicken, broccoli, and rice, fucking 5 times a day or whatever. And they've done pretty well for themselves. You're like, oh, holy shit, somebody's in shape. You fucking, improved since the last time I saw you. That might be like a moderate, maybe a high effect size, but then a large effect size be like, bro, did you go like win like a national show or something? You juicing, that kind of thing. So the effect size increases depending on sort of like the way it's commonly explained is like how the easier it is to see the change, basically. Basing protein intake on fat-free mass, and this is Menno's assertion now, was no more effective than basing it on body weight. The R2 and SE data fits were virtually identical. The infographic states that expressing protein intake relative to fat-free mass rather than body mass is more accurate and effective. However, our article did not make this claim directly. Instead, we reported that protein intake in grams per kilogram of fat-free mass was a stronger predictor of favorable fat-free mass change because its credible interval did not cross 0, whereas the credible interval for protein intake in grams per kilogram body mass did. Now, I'm assuming that credible interval may also be referring to confidence interval. I'm assuming it may refer to the same thing. I haven't seen credible interval in descriptions of studies that I've read before. I've seen confidence intervals, and basically what a confidence interval is when you're looking at like a meta-analysis or some kind of study is it's basically within a certain percentage of certainty, you can say that the true difference between means lies between this range. And if the confidence interval does indeed cross 0 and go into the negative, it could potentially be a sign that not only is the result not sufficient, but the relationship between the data that you are observing could actually be the inverse of what you expect. So it could actually be that the relationship you're seeing is actually the opposite. So a good example is I might see if I can find it now. I don't want to mess up the OBS thing. OBS has been very, very temperamental today, so I might not. But if you have a confidence interval of like systolic blood pressure, this is a good example I always go to. So you have systolic blood pressure in diabetics and non-diabetics. The mean for the diabetics is 146 milligrams of mercury, and the mean for the diabetics and the non-diabetics in the sample is 140. So the difference between the means is 6. But then the confidence interval, if you're looking at like a 95% confidence, would be like from 13 to like minus 1.1 or something like that. So obviously the mean data would show that in, if it did reach significance or whatever, is that blood pressure is lower than in non-diabetics than diabetics, or that maybe being diabetic increases your blood pressure. These are things that data could show. But because the confidence interval actually goes down below 0, could actually be showing the opposite. So that's why if you're seeing confidence intervals, typically are set at 95%, and it shows you, we can say within 95% confident that the true difference lies between these two numbers. That's what the confidence interval is. Now, if you change the confidence interval, if you change it to say 90%, well, those two values are going to get closer together. But you can't be as certain that the actual mean difference lies within those values. You're 5% less certain. Whereas if they try to extrapolate and go to a 99% confidence interval, so we could say with, if you're going to your supervisor after you've just done a study, say you're doing your dissertation project, you've just done a study, you've got your means, you've done all this, you've done the statistical analysis, and your 95% confidence interval says that the mean lies between here and here. Well, if you decide to then go to them and say, look, with 95% confidence, we can say that the real difference lies between here and here. Well, it says, well, what about 99% confidence? Well, obviously, in order for you to be more certain, you'd have to be wider in your estimation. A weird analogy I thought of when I was trying to explain this is a little bit like if you were like going hiking in the jungle, I guess, and you got lost and you were eventually found and you're in this helicopter going over the jungle. Well, where were you in that jungle looking down on it? And if you were, you could look at the entire jungle. Imagine you go up so high you could see the entire jungle. Well, you could say with 100% certainty that you got lost in there. You got lost in that jungle. And you could say with 100% certainty that you got lost in there, but obviously you can't necessarily point to one specific place because you're just talking about the entire jungle. But the closer and closer you get to the jungle, the less certain you're going to be about where you actually got lost. So that's like the way that I sort of think about it when I think about confidence intervals. I'm not sure, like, don't get me wrong, that's not like a scientifically empiric analogy, that's not good. You can't go and reference this analogy, but that's the way I've always thought about when I've looked at confidence intervals. Anyway, I'm assuming that they mean the same thing. They also continue this response. This suggests that grams per kilogram of fat-free mass provides a stronger association with fat-free mass changes, but not necessarily that it is universally more accurate as effective. We stated in the article, dietary protein intake expressed relative to fat-free mass had a higher probability of favorably influencing fat-free mass change than the model with protein expressed relative to body mass, 99 versus 97%, so there's not much difference. As the entirety of the 95% HDI was positive and did not include 0. Not sure, to be honest, what HDI stands for. I've never seen a HDI statistic before, so that'd be something which I go and read the full study and maybe we can come back to that. Our response continued to this previous response where Mena was talking about the protein intake based on fat-free mass was no more effective than basing it on body weight. Additionally, our findings showed that scaling protein by fat-free mass resulted in a 26% narrower credible interval, indicating a more precise slope estimate compared to scaling by body mass. So basically, again, what they're saying is they managed to narrow that interval where they're sure that the true mean or the true difference would lie by 26% by using fat-free mass, an accurate measure of fat-free mass versus body mass. This suggests that grams per kilograms of fat-free mass may offer greater statistical precision, though in our case, we reported values both ways. Since our sample was homogeneous in body fat level by design, the impact of scaling by fat-free mass was likely less pronounced. Nonetheless, the narrower, credible interval, albeit marginally, suggests that protein intake relative to fat-free mass may be preferable metric for predicting fat-free mass changes. So obviously, you might see that and you think that, you got to start going and prescribing your protein intakes off of fat-free mass. So you can potentially do that, but obviously, as Menno mentioned, which is valid, he mentioned that people are very, very bad, at estimating body fat percentage, and they are. So, in my opinion, given that it's not that much difference, it's not that much difference whatsoever, and it's very, very close to 0. It's positive and did not include 0. It's very, very close. It's very, very close. That using body mass is still just perfectly fine. Using body mass is still just a perfectly fine metric. Last one. The effect of protein intake on fat-free mass interestingly decreased at higher energy deficits in both the fat-free mass and body weight models. This contrasts with the idea that we need more protein in greater deficits. Caution is needed in interpretation of the secondary analysis. I believe you might also hear secondary analysis or secondary analyses referred to as sub-hoc analyses. If there was a significant difference found, that is. But in the secondary analyses, they split some of the groups. So in here, you've got a subgrouping by median split, which is less than or equal to and greater than 300 calories per day. I believe that is in terms of an energy deficit, from what I've read in it. I believe that's referencing some energy deficit conditions. This ensured balance but reduced statistical power and increased uncertainty in effect size estimates. Alternative cutoffs, such as less than or more than 500 calories per day, could yield different insights but would create unequal groups. So they had a lot of roadblocks to grouping people in these studies, and that's obviously a limitation with any systematic review and meta-regression because you're simply trying to do the best with what you have in terms of a pooled data set. We aim to select cutoff categories based on theory and statistical standards used effect size differences and probabilities for interpretation, and acknowledged the lower sample size per subgroup where relevant. So what they're saying is they acknowledged all of the limitations, such as low sample size and stuff like that, but they're doing the best they can to elicit as much information from the data set as possible. So that right there, and I don't know if Menno ever left a comment on it. I don't know if he did. I don't think he's left a comment on it, which would be good. And then you have all the doctors in the comments. Let's just go back straight up to the top. There we go. I don't think there was any. This is me going through it live now. I don't think. Obviously, people are saying whatever they want in the bloody comments and stuff. No, there's still no comments on it from Menno, as far as I know. Maybe he's done a video on his YouTube channel responding to this. Who knows? But that's a great example. Not only you got a lot to take away from that. Obviously, I'll link the study below if you want to check it out. Oh, God, pardon me. So, let's transition back. So obviously, I'll link the study below if you decided that you did want to go and check it out, read it for yourself. I have not read it at time that I am recording this, or at least I have not read the full text. I have read parts of the results. I have read the conclusions, where I can confirm that a lot of what they said about their conclusions, where they mentioned that their results were meant to be taken as exploratory, not conclusive. That is absolutely true. They did state that. So it's not them just trying to like cover tracks or cover from, Menno's critiques or anything like that by saying things that they didn't actually say. No, you can go and read that study. You will find exactly what they said. So, great example of how discourse is meant to be handled in the scientific community. I'm looking forward to see if Menno has any critiques on that. But in terms of what the actual studies were showing, guys, in my opinion, you don't have to start prescribing your protein intakes on fat-free mass and stuff like that. You don't have to start going from like 1 gram or 2 grams per kilogram of body mass per day to 10 grams per kilogram of body mass per day. You don't just need to start eating chicken and steak nonstop. Okay, make sure you get your fiber, make sure you get your micronutrients, make sure you get your starchy carbs, all these kinds of things, okay? Make sure you're getting your essential fats and all the rest of it. But it does give us some interesting things to look forward to in the future with regards to protein intakes. And who knows, maybe if you're somebody that's on a certain level of protein intake, let's just say you're at that 1.6 grams per kilogram body mass per day, and you're not noticing the most favorable changes, well, maybe you can increase it to say 2 or 2.2 or 2.5 and go from there. Maybe you can gradually, like you would progressively overload your training, progressively overload your protein intake. So that is it from me today, pretty much. So go and read the study if you want. to be eager to hear your responses. Let me know about the layout if you enjoyed the layout of this podcast. Makes it a lot easier for me to showcase things in there at the time, whereas having to go back and put images and screenshots and stuff like that in the post-processing. So it's going to make it a lot easier. Let me just see if I can find the study for you. So I'm hoping that OBS is not going to break when I bring this up. But this is where, as I said, you can find the study. So let me add this in for you. I'm going to, where is it to? Yeah, let's do this. So, just bear with me, guys. I'm doing this. Oh, that's not the right one. Just bear with me, guys. I am doing this live. So, I'm hoping that nothing goes wrong. Something might indeed go wrong. But obviously, go check out the posts for themselves. Let's do it. Where is it? Let's do this. I'm still learning the ropes of this kinds of thing. Oh, no. It's not working. It's not working at all. Don't know why it's not working. Let me see. Yeah, that's not what I want. I was hoping to... Because I've got the study saved to my computer for me to read it. Hoping to be able to showcase it in OBS for you, but it's not letting me do it for some reason, unless I try just one more. Let's Let's just try this. Don't think this is going to work, but we shall try. No. Maybe it just won't allow me to do 2 at once. That's what she said. No, not bringing it up for some reason. But either way, I'll read for you the title of the study for you now. I'll give you guys what you'll need to go find it. Obviously, you'll find the link down below anyway. It's called The Effect of Dietary Protein on Fat-Free Mass in Energy-Restricted, Resistance-Trained Individuals, an Updated Systematic Review with Meta-Regression by Martin Ruffalo, Eric Trexler, and Eric Helms. Came out literally just this year, 25th of January, and you'll find it in the Strength and Conditioning Journal. So you'll find it in there. Go enjoy your reading, and thank you very much. Make sure you try, when you're talking with people, if you're talking with people about a study or talking with people about training, nutrition, all of these things, it's very, very easy to be belligerent and almost a conversational bully when you're talking about these things. Don't be like that. Let's foster good conversations when we're talking about these things. And let's have really, really good, constructive, discourse, such as you saw here, that really contribute to everybody's understanding and interpretation. So if you have any thoughts, obviously leave them down below. And yeah, I'll catch up with you guys very, very soon. Adios, amigo. Godspeed.